Miruns, also known as the Tongue Givers, are one of many types of magic person that have evolved in the Afterworld. It's worth noting that they are still human, unlike the French. If someone swallows the tip of a Mirun's tongue, even if they are not also a Mirun, a telepathic link will form between them. The Mirun whose tongue is swallowed is called a tongue giver, while the person who swallows their tongue is called a tongue taker. This lets them send each other their thoughts at will regardless of how far apart they are. It does not let them read each other's minds, mind control one another, delve through each other's memories, or anything else along those lines. So if you're linked to someone, you can still lie to and hide things from them. For example, if I was linked to a member of the IRS, DEA, FBI, or the World Health Organization, I might still be able to avoid going to prison by just not letting them know what I get up to on the weekends. The Afterworld doesn't have phones or radios, so telepathy is very useful. Miruns can regrow their tongues, sometimes overnight but more often needing 2 or 3 days, so a single Mirun can connect to multiple people. Having too many telepathic connections can cause brain damage in both regular humans and Miruns. Normal humans can usually only have 1, sometimes 2 connections before getting any more would cause brain damage, whereas Miruns can have between 6 and 12. Miruns can instinctively tell how many is too many and usually become incapable of making connections once having any more would cause brain damage. Regular humans, on the other hand, just lobotomize themselves a little bit more every time they make an extra connection, like my ex-wife would do to me anytime we disagreed on something. Drugs and body modification could in theory be used to make mind reading, memory delving and mind control possible, but not once in all of Mirun history has this ever worked as intended or gone well in general. Modifying Miruns to be able to make more connections than is natural for them is a thing and very common. The tip of the Mirun's tongue has to be undamaged for a connection to be made because it contains a special organ that needs to still be alive when it enters the tongue eater's stomach. This means no cooking, chewing, drying, freezing, stepping on or injecting meth into it, along with anything else that might damage it. That said, there are people who eat cooked Mirun tongues as a gourmet dish because they contain chemicals that have a narcotic effect, similar to cocaine or opium. Some Miruns take advantage of this, such as by selling their tongues or cooking up their own tongues, but there are some Miruns who are held captive so that their tongues can be continually cut out after regrowing. There are ways to store Mirun tongues without stopping them from being able to form telepathic connections. For example, if you keep one in an airtight container full of the blood of the Mirun it came from, then it will remain usable for up to 6 weeks. After the tip of the tongue is swallowed, it takes several hours before a telepathic link is formed. Non-Miruns usually experience nasty headaches for days or weeks during and after the formation of these telepathic links. It can go wrong, and it is less likely to if the other person who swallows the tongue is also a Mirun. As for why you need to eat the tip of a Mirun's tongue to become able to spam their brain with thoughts about why the divorce wasn't your fault, brain portals. In the Afterworld, portals can be created, but both ends of a portal have to be made in the same place and then separated. You usually find them inside the bodies of living things, such as leviathans, using them to get around some of the problems of being so
Gigantosaurus, whatever you say, Gigantosaurus.
Or hive-minded creatures using portals to connect their brains to each other, which is similar to what Miruns do. Inside of a Mirun's throat, a little organ grows, and inside of that both ends of a portal are formed. This organ splits into 2 smaller organs, and each of those has a different end of the portal inside of them. One of these goes to the tip of the Mirun's tongue. When someone swallows the tip of the Mirun's tongue, it works its way up to and clings to the inside of their skull. The other half, which is still inside of the Mirun, goes up to and clings to the inside of the Mirun's skull. So the Mirun and the tongue eater both have one of these tiny organs inside of their skulls. Since there are portals between both halves of the organ, this makes a portal between the skulls of the Mirun and whoever ate their tongue. The Mirun's brain grows a little bit of nerve tissue through the portal and connects to the tongue eater's brain, and that nerve tissue is what thoughts are sent along. Both people telepathically linked to each other can send each other their thoughts. So if a Mirun decides to spam another person's brain with thoughts of hot muscly men twerking, the other person can respond with an imaginary musical number about how much they want the Mirun dead. There is no way to block thoughts sent by someone once you are connected to them, except to make them unable to send you their thoughts at all. Methods include knocking them unconscious, killing them, or cutting off the connection entirely, which isn't something that can just be done at will and is often very dangerous. Since a connection consists of a portal between 2 brains, it is possible for things in one brain to cross over to the other. This includes drugs, but also poisons and diseases, so Miruns have evolved a function that automatically cuts off the connection if there is anything dangerous that might cross over. The connection is also automatically cut if either person's heart stops or their brain activity stops, as this is a sign that they have died and dead tissue or whatever killed them crossing through a portal could be a big problem. All of this can be taken advantage of to cut off the connection, but is also dangerous. It also cuts off all telepathic connections a person has, including any that they would rather keep. That said, it is possible to reform lost connections with the same people after those connections have been cut. Just repeat the same old tongue swallowing rigmarole with them. Being able to cut off connections is helpful because even worse than getting a telepathic connection willingly and regretting it later is getting one by force or accident, both of which can and do happen. Forced connections usually happen when Miruns are conscripted, enslaved, or otherwise forced to work for someone that they would rather not. But another common cause is people not fully understanding how telepathy or Miruns work. For example, if a Mirun with valuable information is captured by someone who thinks that a telepathic link lets you read a person's mind or look through their memories, neither of which are the case. Miruns will usually also form links to family members, typically one or both of their parents during childhood, so that they can contact each other in emergencies. Accidental connections are usually the result of Miruns kissing with tongue. If a Mirun deeply cares for or desires or trusts another Mirun, they will have an impulse to bite out and swallow their tongue while kissing. This is especially a problem among teenagers since these impulses are new for them and teenagers tend to be pretty impulsive. The land the Miruns evolved in only had other Miruns, and so their instincts developed with an assumption that everyone they meet is a fellow Mirun. So a regular human also risks losing their tongue when they kiss a Mirun, except it won't grow back. The land the Miruns are from is called Mirinara, literally meaning land of the Miruns. Its soil is full of a blue pigment which works its way into all of the plants, drinking water, animals, and people. This pigment is a weak poison that builds up in the bodies, slowly weakening and killing anyone who consumes it on a regular basis. For some reason that sentence made me think of my ex-wife. Anyway, Miruns evolved the capacity to get rid of this pigment by sweating it out. A side effect of this is that it would get into and permanently dye their hair and clothes, making them blue and extremely difficult to wash out. This pigment being in everything made a lot of other things blue as well though, so this was actually pretty good for camouflage. There are people who have blue hair because the pigment for it is made in their bodies rather than gotten from their food, but for most Miruns this wasn't the case. Dark blue eyes were also the norm because a little bit of the pigment would get into the iris of each Mirun. Miruns who never washed or didn't wash often enough were at risk of developing bluish skin as the pigment could stick to it. So if a Mirun saw a Smurf, they would probably gag at the thought of how unhygienic they must be. Having clothes or hair that wasn't blue was a status symbol, as it meant you could afford to bleach the blueness out, replace your clothes regularly, and didn't sweat much because you didn't have to do much manual labour. Bleaching hair often turned it white, so the ruling class of Mirinara were the white hairs, and the regular people beneath them having blue hair were called the blue hairs. It was taboo for white hairs and blue hairs to form telepathic links or socially interact with one another, which includes romance. How Miruns evolved their telepathy is unclear, but there are other creatures capable of it, including in their homeland. Mirinara is mountainous but also full of blue grasslands where the grass is usually taller than the people. You can't do sign language with someone who is out of your sight, such as if there is a load of tall grass in the way, and talking out loud can be a bad idea if it lets predators, prey, or enemies know where you are. This leaves telepathy as a pretty good option, even though it limits how many people you can communicate with at a time. The most common cause of death for Miruns in their homeland was violence, as they were often killed by predators, prey that fought back, other Miruns, and the Trunkmen. The Trunkmen are a separate species from humans, unlike Miruns but very much like the French. Trunkmen info is on screen but won't be explained out loud since this video is about the Miruns, not the French, I mean Trunkmen. Mirun telepathy enabled communication between different tribes and clans of massive distances, and this was generally handled by the Whitehairs. This was great for cooperation between tribes, such as for catching criminals and building monuments, but cooperation between tribes could also consist of wiping out tribes they mutually disliked, and just as the truth could spread faster, so could lies. At the end of the day though, Mirinara has become uninhabitable. A disease of unknown origin swept through the land and genetically modified all of the plants, making them produce a new poison that Miruns couldn't develop any immunity to. The Lampeque Temple, a massive religious organization dedicated to the Lampeque religion, rescued an unknown number of Miruns, saving them from extinction. They actually intended to save more than they did, but most of those rescued died at sea due to sea monsters, storms, starvation, and disease. At the same time, the temple was the only organisation that both knew that the Miruns existed and had ships capable of crossing the sea to save them, these being massive bronze ships covered in spikes that kept sea monsters at bay. The price of admission onto the temple's ships was conversion to Lampeque, the religion the temple is dedicated to, and a lifelong oath of absolute loyalty and obedience to the temple. In addition to this, the temple initially only rescued white hairs as it moved up Mirinara's coast, considering the blue hairs to be lesser and not really worth saving. When they heard that all the remaining places they were planning to rescue white hairs from had fallen to starvation, cannibalism and the local wildlife, the crews picked up as many blue hairs as they could from their current position and began their journey back to Lampeque, where the leaders of these crews were punished for not continuing to focus on saving white hairs and wasting food and ship space on the blue hairs. This wasn't that long ago in lore, so some Miruns alive today were actually among those the temple rescued, though all of them are pretty old now. A lifetime oath is a lifetime oath, so these are still bound in loyalty and obedience to the temple, or have become outlaws by leaving. That said, a lot of Miruns are not under the temple's thumb. Due to the genes that make someone a Mirun being recessive, there is basically no difference between a half Mirun and a normal human, including that you can't tell them apart by looking at them. When a half Mirun has a child with another half Mirun or a regular Mirun, it is possible for the child to come out as a regular Mirun. The majority of blue-haired Miruns that the temple rescued were related, as they were from the same small village, and white hairs refused to marry or reproduce with them as they believed the blue hairs to be inferior. The Miruns were also spread across Lampeque to work for the temple, and the blue hairs were used to marrying for love, which naturally led to them getting with regular humans wherever they were assigned, rather than just marrying whoever the temple told them to, which is what the white hairs were more into. The temple didn't bother keeping the half Miruns under their thumb because they didn't know that half Miruns can make Mirun children, and so both the Miruns and future Mirun descendants were able to get away from the temple. Getting away from the temple was a good idea for the blue hairs and their descendants because the temple wasn't very nice to them. This is to say that the temple not really getting how genetics work at the time saved a load of people from being oppressed and exploited. The temple viewed Mirun telepathy as a bit of an abomination because of the part where eating a tongue is necessary, as they believed that counted as cannibalism. However, they respected the white hairs because they were the Mirun equivalent to nobility and royalty, and the temple is kind of into that kind of stuff. The Miruns who have remained under the temple's control are known as pure Miruns, since they usually have an entirely Mirun ancestry. These are mostly white hairs, but it does include some blue hairs, as some of them did marry each other and some Miruns born outside of the temple have joined it for whatever reason, such as being very religious. A lot of pure Miruns are essentially lent out by the temple to powerful people, groups and organisations who it likes or is pretending to like, such as Lamara's royal family. These borrowed helpers are often considered untrustworthy because they are loyal to the temple, not those they are being lent to. And so it's basically a given that they will engage in espionage against those they have been lent to if the temple asks them to, and are more or less guaranteed to be feeding information to the temple. Impure Miruns or free Miruns are those outside of the temple's control. They usually dye their hair blue and think the pure Miruns are a load of tossers. Despite most of them having a more mixed ancestry, they are generally better at maintaining Mirun traditions, stories and so on, because the temple stops the pure Miruns from doing anything the temple considers heretical and improper. Either way, the most common job of a Mirun is long distance communication. Being able to just think all the information needed at someone is a lot faster, more reliable and less effort than making someone actually travel to deliver that information. All this said, message carriers and so on do still exist because there aren't very many Miruns, and even if there were, it is always wise to have a backup plan. Being linked to a Mirun can be dangerous because despite portals automatically closing if they detect anything dangerous, there are some diseases and poisons that can go through without being detected or stopped. So it is possible to kill everyone telepathically linked to a person at the same time as that person by infecting or poisoning them with one of these special poisons or diseases. In the worst cases, a disease might be capable of continually spreading through a telepathic network, killing everyone within it. Because of this, powerful people don't like to be telepathically linked to Miruns, making other people do it for them, because it opens up another avenue through which they could be assassinated. And telepathic networks are generally kept small, with people who just talk out loud to each other being used as an in-between between those networks. Speaking of things happening, the end of the video. Like, subscribe, comment the thoughts you'd send if telepathically linked to your worst enemy, and have a terrible day because we both know you don't deserve a good one.